Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President of Homes Airbnb, Greg Greeley, in discussion with Skift Senior Hospitality Editor, Deanna Ting.
So our next speaker, he might be relatively new to his role as the head of homes for Airbnb, but he's definitely not new to the worlds of e-commerce and loyalty. Prior to joining Airbnb in March, Greg spent 18 years at Amazon, where he was most recently leading Amazon's Global Prime program, which you also happened to help invent and launch back in 2005. So before I begin to pepper him with a lot of questions, I just want to remind the audience to please submit any questions that you might have for Greg that we can answer at the end of our session, and feel free to upvote any that you particularly like as well. So Greg, thank you so much for being with us today. This is your first major appearance at a travel conference since joining Airbnb, right?
It is, yes.
Great.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been about 7 months on the new job, or 6 months. And I wanted to ask you, what's the transition been like from going from Amazon to Airbnb?
Well, it's actually been a blast. I am just totally excited to have joined such an energetic company. There's just so much enthusiasm for what the community that's been built and the way that the company wakes up every day. They have over 4,000 employees waking up every day thinking about ways they can innovate on behalf of the hosts and guests. And so that's been very fun. Obviously, it's very difficult to leave from, Amazon, a truly great company, having been there 18 years. But in many ways, this feels, Airbnb just had its 10th birthday. And that was August 10th. On August 11th, we welcomed a record number of over 3.5 million guest arrivals. Later that month in August, we hit a 400 million total guest arrivals all time. And so it was really fun to be there as part of those major milestones. But it really is a kind of a transition point for the company. And I liken it to when Amazon was 10 years old in 2005. It's very much joining Airbnb now is like joining Amazon in 2005. There's this incredible amount of enthusiasm, the first kind of product, the homes product, the team's hitting their stride, they really have found ways to innovate. The travel industry is a trillion-dollar opportunity, much like the retail industry, and there really is an Amazon-sized opportunity available for innovations in travel. And the global community is very open to seeking new ways about traveling and exploring and discovering new experiences.
Yeah, that's great. And this transition point is sort of an idea that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of Airbnb turning 10 this year, being on its road to an IPO, now encouraging hotels to join its platform, launching tours and activities back in 2016, launching Plus earlier this year, the collection of vetted homes, adding a loyalty program soon of its own, Super Guest. And it certainly seems like Airbnb is very much on that road to achieving that super brand of travel appellation, right? But I also think that there's some people who might think that the company is at a really pivotal crossroads, that it could sort of be, in some ways, maybe struggling to balance its future with its past. And I wanted to ask you, how do you sort of personally view this evolution that the company is going through, this maturation? And do you think Airbnb can grow without alienating the people who really helped it get to where it is today?
Well, absolutely, I think so. One of the things I did as my transition, the week before I started at Airbnb, I actually took a journey. I went and drove along Route 66, and what I wanted to do was really connect with hosts and hear directly from the hosts. I had stayed along the West Coast many times in Airbnbs and many vacation, tourist destinations. I'd been to Europe when I lived there for the better part of 6 years. But I just wanted to hear from the heartland, what it meant, this community that had just exploded over the last 10 years, that were opening up their homes and inviting guests in, what were their needs. And for me, that was really the foundation of what Airbnb is and will continue to be.
Yeah.
And so hearing, from hosts, what they really have all enjoyed was the fact that it created new connections, that by participating in Airbnb, both as a host and as a guest, it's creating connection they never envisioned, new experiences. and that is what, those new connections, those magical experiences is what has kind of driven us to look for other ways to innovate along people's travel. And the launch of the new businesses, Airbnb experiences, was very much from listening to the community. And we found that just like there's entrepreneurs that were eager to open up their homes and use hosting as an entrepreneurial activity, there were lots of passionate artists and lots of activities in each local community that people were willing to share and excited to share. So the way that Airbnb is thinking about its evolution and the way we think about it internally about the different kind of extensions we're doing is very much by listening to the community, both the hosts and the guests, and tying that back to, are we really driving great, differentiated, innovative travel that's people-powered and centered around just a true great local experience.
Right. I guess I also wonder, for how long can you sort of rely on the Airbnb community to be the primary distinguisher between you and all the other, big online travel competitors with whom you compete in the private accommodation space? I'm talking about like Booking and HomeAway and even other big brands like Google or your former employer, Amazon.
Yeah. Well, we're going to, in perpetuity, the community really is what has made Airbnb special. And as we, one of the things as I came on board, we realized we wanted to make sure as there's all these other innovations happening with experiences, with the luxury segment, with Airbnb Plus, that we weren't losing the sight of the fact that hosts were really the core to what we've built and where our innovation is coming from. So I hired Laura Chambers in to actually lead that. This was an executive that had led kind of individual merchants at eBay, and very much about this community, growing that community, and we're doing all kinds of things to really keep that at the center. And that doesn't mean that they're not part of multiple parts of the magical trip, we call it. There's between the experiences and the other type of services that we are looking to attach to an Airbnb trip. There will be lots of community along that entire journey.
Right. And in terms of the home space specifically, what do you want to do specifically to make sure that Airbnb retains its leading position in private accommodations?
Well, we're going to continue to listen to our community, listen to the hosts and guests that are traveling, that are using the platform each and every day. Certainly things like Airbnb Plus was an outgrowth of us listening to our guests and our hosts. Many hosts were saying, hey, I would like to find a way where I could differentiate the offering that I have, and many guests were saying, hey, I would like to make sure I know where there's a high quality offering. For those of you who don't know, Airbnb Plus is a special segment on Airbnb that is highly curated. We do a multiple point inspection that is done. All the amenities are going to be similar, and so guests go there knowing exactly what they're having, and we're finding that's been performing incredibly well for us. Generally, hosts that join Airbnb Plus and go through it is significant work to make sure you meet the design aesthetic and meet all of the requirements. But those that do will see like a 9 times more likelihood to get bookings. When they do get bookings, we're seeing about 40% more bookings, 70% more nights booked for hosts that are participating. So it's been super successful, and we're really looking to scale that across many areas. We added 3 times more cities since we announced that product in February. And even just last week, we announced in Auckland, Athens, and Bali that the Airbnb Plus is available. So it's one of those that really came from listening to our community and listening to what both hosts and guests wanted.
Yeah, I definitely couldn't see Plus as like that bridge for Airbnb. It's definitely sort of that connector to reach more mainstream audiences or people who may not have always considered Airbnb previously for their accommodations. But this is a space that's also seeing a lot of intense competition. You have hotel companies like Accor and Marriott and Hyatt getting deeper into home sharing with their sort of respective investments in similar types of products to Airbnb Plus. And you also have these other sort of brands emerging in that space, like sort of like the service department brands like a Sonder or the Guild or Lyric and a ton of others. So I just wanted to ask you, what do you generally think of that, this growth and interest in this part of private accommodation specifically?
Well, I think it's super exciting because remember, this is travel is $1 trillion market, and there's going to be lots of winners. And for us, we really don't focus on competitors. We're really focused on what are we doing for the product we have. Each and every day, we have these over 4,000 employees waking up thinking about how can we make Airbnb better, listening to the community, listening to our hosts and guests, because that's ultimately what's going to make sure that we're successful, is being successful for that growth and for that the groups that are using us. Now, that said, there's lots of, the beauty of Airbnb is it's been a platform that hotels for years have been using to list individual rooms and find that us as a unique channel. And one of the things February, when we announced Airbnb Plus, we really said our objective is that Airbnb should be for anyone. And we made it very clear that we welcome certain boutique hotels and bed and breakfasts and those that are providing a people-powered or local, very passionate experience. We would like those on the platform, and that's true of many of the innovators that are out there are finding ways to work with us or to leverage our platform to serve this community in a neat and special way.
Right. For you, in terms of success for the home segment, I know growth is probably a really big metric that you're looking at and measuring global growth. And I wanted to ask you, what kind of global growth are we seeing from Airbnb today? And do you think that there are some markets where you've reached maybe a bit of a saturation point? And as you pursue more growth in terms of more listings, more nights, more arrivals, are you going to pursue a more organic approach or, growth through acquisition?
Well, I don't think, there is lots of growth opportunity here, and certainly, growth is an important metric. The one we actually look at more is, the quality. How are guests enjoying their stays? How are hosts growing their business? Or we want to be a platform for economic empowerment for these hosts, and so that's probably a much more important metric for us. But we are still growing, and fairly significantly, and we're going to keep investing in those things that are meeting the community's needs. Things we'll listen to. The hosts and guests. And again, the travel is not just around tourism. It's also about living. And so we're seeing people realizing that they can use Airbnb to support kind of local growth, local activities, including funerals, weddings, high school reunions. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are happening on the local level. And when you look at the numbers, we're just a small percentage of the population are actually active hosts. As much as the number is big and as much as it's growing very rapidly, there is lots of opportunity for people to discover the kind of economic empowerment that can do, particularly as people are trying to pay for the rent or make their mortgage, and we're seeing more and more people leveraging that.
Right. And in terms of your revenues, I wanted to ask you, what share of Airbnb's revenues comes from homes today, and how much will that be 5 or 10 years from now?
Well, we're a private company, so we don't break that out.
That's why I asked.
I know you were going to ask. But at one period in time at Amazon, I oversaw the media business, and it was 80% of revenues at the time. And I remember telling the team, this is exciting that you're this big part of the revenue, but we should be happy to keep growing at a rapid rate, but look forward to being the smallest part of the business. And so I'm actually using that same line to the homes team. We're going to, the homes team is actually motivated to grow and really engage our guests and get more people participating. But our experiences business and some of the other services and the extensions that we're working on are growing incredibly well. So as we think about taking every journey that a guest may be going on and thinking about how we can inject some form of a people-powered or local magical experience, there's a whole bunch of opportunity for us to not only make our guests' journeys great, but really unlock a tremendous amount of opportunity for people living in the communities where they're traveling to.
Yeah, you've been talking a lot about experiences, and you've told me that you really hope that more Airbnb home guests will be booking experiences, and even people who may not necessarily be staying in an Airbnb will book an experience on Airbnb. And I wonder, do you think there's some sort of fundamental change that's needed in terms of how we as a collective travel industry look at the tours and activity space, or how we view package travel, how we communicate that to consumers?
What do you know about the industry? Again, lots of people are going to take different approaches. For us, it's our experiences, and I understand you had one at Santiago.
I did.
Yeah. It's about having true local people provide their passions, their personal passions, and it's highly curated. There's lots of experiences that are commodities out there that have been around for decades. What you'll find on Airbnb and experiences is very much local items you can't find anywhere. For example, we have a vegetarian taxidermist in London. We have a grandmother that teaches boxing in South Africa. We have somebody that will give you a flight across the desert in Arizona in a World War II airplane. So these are people's personal passions. The concerts business, or our music business, is just taking off in gangbusters. It's just on fire. And it's because local artists and musicians are pouring their heart and soul into this kind of new opportunity that's become available to them. Hosting a 20 to 30 person musical experience in a private home every night of the week. And we see lots of people on the experiences side, again, because they're following their passion. We've had a number of our hosts for the experiences actually leave their full-time job so that they could pursue hosting and experience as their full-time career.
Right. Well, speaking of your hosts, I know last week Airbnb made some news by sort of submitting a letter to the SEC asking for a mechanism for giving equity to its hosts. Now, I have to admit, when I saw that, I thought, is this just a marketing ploy?
No. Not at all.
What would you say to that?
This is one of those things that is very much in the core of Airbnb. And as I was going through the interview process, it was one of the things that the leadership there was already talking about. It's like, boy, we really want to find a way where we can engage hosts and allow them to be equity owners. Now, it turns out, with the capital markets and with, it's very complicated. Between the regulation and the tax, there's a number of hurdles that we have, but we're excited to get that process going because, as I mentioned, hosts really are the core of everything that Airbnb is, and we really want them to be a part of ownership as well.
So I'm going to switch gears a bit and talk to you about Airbnb for work. So I have a little anecdote to share with you. A couple weeks ago, one of my really close college friends, who happens to be an insurance agent, who specializes specifically in corporate insurance for kidnap and ransom, stayed with me. And I asked her, she travels around the world all the time, stays in all these different places. And I asked her, do you ever stay in an Airbnb when you travel for work? And she's like, no. I'm not allowed to. So how are you convincing companies like hers that it's okay to stay in an Airbnb for work?
Yeah, Airbnb for work is one of those just kind of great ways, an indication of the team listening to the community. I think early on, probably 5 years or so, the team really started to see this pickup of people that were enjoying Airbnb for their leisure travel and starting to use it for work. And so they started to put more intention in designing the product and meeting the needs of those work travelers. And so between 2015 and 2016, it tripled the number of people that were using Airbnb for work. And it tripled again last year, and we're growing at that same or faster pace now. And so what we've done is, one is instrument the site to allow people to indicate when they're traveling for work. Two, we've gone in, over 700,000 companies now have employees that are using Airbnb for work, for their work travel. And over 275,000 of them have travel managers directly engaged in booking other people's travels or actually managing the process. So that meant we needed to do some integrations with some of the corporate providers. It meant we needed to kind of rethink the product that we were offering. And it's been super successful. I've been really pleased to see people respond. And it's not too surprising because anyone that travels for work knows that can be exhausting, particularly people that travel a lot. And so having the opportunity to live where you're traveling and living like a local is, not too surprisingly, something that a large percentage of the business travelers want to do from time to time. And so we've been super happy with that. Now, last week we also announced that we've been innovating in other ways for the Airbnb for work. So corporate offsites are one where at times, going into yet another conference room that looks boring can be a challenge. And so, we've found many hosts that are opening up their homes where they have special venues, be it a backyard or a special retreat area that people can have offsites. And we've also found that people that are traveling for relocation, of course, getting to live with someone in a home or someone that has a second home, that can be a very pleasurable way to go through what is usually a fairly difficult process when you're moving from one city to another. And then lastly, as I talked about the Airbnb experiences, we're finding that people really enjoy morale events and kind of activities that will bring groups closer together. And some of these unusual kind of local-driven experiences can be great for offsites. There's over about 127 million full-time employees in the U.S., and on average, you're seeing about $400 per employee being spent on morale building. And there's nothing better than going to a local Airbnb experience and tapping into some kind of unique passion that's really grounded in your local community.
So I want to turn to what little time we have left and turn to our audience questions, because this one actually kind of sets things up nicely for a question I wanted to ask you. So Glenn Fogel, the CEO of Booking, said earlier today about Airbnb, quote, "You don't just get to choose to ignore the law, you need to change the law." What are your thoughts on that, and how do you feel about the regulatory battles over short-term rentals in a lot of major destinations, New York included?
Yeah, it's interesting to see, because Airbnb started with the community, and so one of the things that our founders have said over and over again is we do want to be a great partner with all stakeholders. And so in literally thousands of cities, we're working out with, to make sure that the regulation framework is good. And we actually do want to comply, make sure that those are thoughtful rules that are in place to allow hosts to do, to tap into this entrepreneurial activity, to kind of generate the extra money they need to pay their expenses or pay for rent and what have you. So we are looking in we're in over 81,000 towns and cities in 191 countries. And we really are looking at wherever possible to be great partners there.
Right. How detrimental would it be if you lost your case here in New York City in particular?
Well, New York City is a really edge case, and I think it's important to recognize, again, we're in over 81,000 towns and cities. We have a big global business. It would be really hard for the hosts here because there are, 77% of the hosts here in New York City are using that money to augment and to pay for, a very expensive rent. And, from the standpoint of Airbnb driving up the house of rent, those numbers just don't pass the smell test. There's like 0.2% of the housing stock is actually in dedicated rentals. And so, usually you look at the numbers there and you find that most people have indexed back to 2008, at the height of the global, kind of the Great Recession and when rent and occupancy were at its lowest. So it's one of those that I'm very hopeful that New York doesn't punish those hosts in that way, because it is really a great opportunity for them to augment their rent.
And I'd be totally remiss if I didn't ask you, what can we expect from Super Guest?
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I'm getting that question from lots of people.
Yes.
It's one of those things, Airbnb community is very loyal, and the guests are super excited about having a Super Guest or some form of loyalty program. So we actually have put together a pilot, did some research, and we looked at that and decided that it wasn't differentiated enough and didn't have enough community involvement for us to launch yet. So we are actually back to the drawing board. Yeah, we have nothing else to share on that, but I can tell you the team's waking up every day thinking about how we can really have a great Super Guest program for those very loyal guests that are asking for it.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. I'm sorry we're out of time. But
yeah, my pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.